I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my final verdict on the Zeiss Loxia 85mm F2.4, and this is a Sonnar optical design. Now, if you haven't already seen my first look episode, I break down the overall build and the design, the handling of this particular lens. And if you would like to find out more about it, I would encourage you to do that there. But of course, the Loxia series represents a premium line of manual focus only lenses for Sony E-mount. Now, of course, you can use these lenses on APS-C cameras, and the small nature of them makes them a natural fit there. But your maximum bang for the buck comes in using them on a full-frame mirrorless camera, like, for example, I use the Sony A7R Mark III for this review. Now, yes, I understand that manual focus is not for everyone, and that's not going to change here. That being said, I would say that of all the platforms for using manual focus glass in the modern era, nothing compares to, and really, I think at any point in time, nothing compares to the convenience offered by modern mirrorless cameras like the A7R Mark III. For one thing, you get the in-body image stabilization, which means that you now get a stabilized 85mm lens. On top of that, you have all the manual focus aids, including when you begin to put input onto the manual focus ring on this lens, which, by the way, is focus perfection. It is perfectly damped, a beautiful focus throw, the ability to have precision, and really, to me, and I don't use manual focus for everything, but there are few experiences more enjoyable in the right settings than using manual focus and watching the plane of focus move across the scene to the place where you want. There's something that is very organic about that process that I feel like it kind of fuels my creativity. And so it's not all bad, but you're getting all those manual focus aids, the ability that when you begin to input focus, it will magnify the selected focus point on either LCD screen or the viewfinder, which allows you to easily visually confirm focus. And if you so desire, you can help that further by putting some kind of overlay focus peaking that is there that will help to show you what exactly is in focus. And I will use that here and there. I use it more for video than I do for stills because I really enjoy, as I said, that kind of visual organic process of watching focus come into the area that I want. And so as far as manual focus goes, it's hard to top the Loxia lenses when it comes to that. Their construction is absolutely premium. This is all metal and glass, top grade materials. In many ways, it's a lot like the Milvus level of build. A similar kind of sleek finish with all metal outer shell. One difference is that the focus ring here is it's a very tightly ribbed metal as opposed to the rubberized focus on the Milvus focus rings. There's a lot of people that would say they prefer the ribbed like is here on the Loxia. Now, they also have a manual aperture ring, and so again, if you're not kind of confident in doing that, some of you may prefer, a lens that has automatic, aperture control from within the camera, since that's the way that most lenses operate. Once again, however, for certain applications, a manual aperture ring is desirable, and I'll detail that a little bit more as we move ahead here. But first thing I do want to note is that the aperture ring on the Loxia lenses and on the 85mm, number one, it has a very definite, very precise feel, quality of action, which is kind of a hallmark of these Zeiss designs. But it also gives you more finite control in that a lot of lenses with a manual aperture ring will either jump right from one stop to another, for example, a detent at f2.8 and then at f4, nothing in between. Or you might get one stop or a half stop in between, one notch in between. In the case of the Loxia series, you actually have 1/3 stop increments, and so it gives you more finite control. So, say in the case of this lens from f2.8, you would go from f2.8 to f3.2 to f3.5 to f4, and so you have more points of precision along there. I always prefer more rather than less control over the aperture, but it also has another trick up its sleeve. At the rear of the lens, on the lens mount, there is a little area where you can either use a little tool from Zeiss, or you can alternatively use a small flat-bladed screwdriver and you put it into that slot, you make a 180-degree turn, and the aperture will become declicked. A declicked aperture means that there are no set stops and you're able to just glide through the whole aperture range in one continuous motion with nothing to stop you along the way. This is particularly applicable when it comes to use with video. And as I mentioned before, there are settings where having a manual control over aperture is preferential, and in this case that ability is preferential in that you can do things like aperture racking or other techniques for video work through that. And yes, the Loxia lenses really are designed with both video and stills in mind. They're great stills photography lenses, but there are certain design elements that are really designed more around video than anything else. Part of that is the commonality of the design. I'm not talking about the cosmetic appearance, but all of these lenses share a common, all 5 of them share a common 52mm front filter thread. But beyond that, and more applicable when it comes to video use, is that they all share a similar diameter, which means you can put something like the Zeiss LensGear Mini on here, and you can have a standardized gearing for focus follow systems or something similar to that. And the fact that they all have a common diameter means that you can easily swap lenses out of, if you have all of this set up, it's a time-consuming process. So if you have all this set up, it's easy to swap in and out of these lenses into these gearing systems. And the byproduct of that is that because of an intentional design, you're going to have a cleaner workflow, waste less time, fumbling around with gear. Now, there certainly are a lot of pros to this approach, and at the same time, however, I think when it comes to the actual 85mm, in some ways I feel like it is the most compromised, at least in terms of the basic design, as opposed to the other Loxia lenses. It has a fairly unique profile, as you can see. It's a very long and slender lens. And part of that, of course, is trying to retain that common diameter across that. I see something similar, and I was reminded of a lens like this, which is one of my classic M42 lenses in my collection. This is a Super Tacumar 150mm F4 lens, and similarly I have 135mm F3.5 lens. And so, I mean, at this point, Tacumar and all of their kind of designs were going with a common 49mm front filter thread, and so because of that commonality of design, you end up with the the telephoto lenses being really long and slender like this, a lot like the Loxia 85mm, and I think for some of the same reasons. Kind of the other trade-off that you get from that too is that this lens has a maximum aperture of f2.4, which frankly is a somewhat odd maximum aperture, particularly at 85mm, and beyond that, I think it is the narrowest maximum aperture that I've seen in a modern 85mm lens. So you have a lot of options of lenses with a wider maximum aperture than what this lens does. Even some of the much more inexpensive ones, like the Sony 85mm f1.8, a very good lens, and then similarly the Zeiss Batis 85mm f1.8. And so, there's some trade-offs that come with kind of designing with that commonality in mind, and I think that that's part of the trade-off there. And so as a stills lens, I'm less entranced by that idea, because I feel like you're kind of paying a compromise, or kind of dealing with a compromise where you don't necessarily get the benefit. I'm on the complete other end of the spectrum when I look at this as a video lens, however, in that I find that the basic design here, the narrowness of it, and this long ability here where you can easily attach that gearing, or as I detailed in another episode, I've used this little device that's called the focus shifter that allows you to have kind of a joystick to be able to have easy control without reaching over the camera at the focus ring. Instead, kind of a joystick where you can go back and forth, and it makes for a more convenient experience. And so I really like that aspect. For video work, it's a great shape. For stills, not so much. And because it is a relatively long lens, it means that a lot of the portability advantages that other Loxia lenses have are somewhat lost with the 85mm. Now, in a second episode, I detailed the image quality from the lens, and there is a lot to love here. While it has a smaller maximum aperture than a lot of lenses, it compensates for that by having a tremendous amount of wide open, both sharpness and contrast, micro contrast. The images that come out of it have a tremendous amount of punch. And as I noted in that image quality segment, in a lot of ways, I'm reminded of a similar telephoto lens from Zeiss that also shares a not so wide maximum aperture, and that's of f2.8, and that's their 135mm Abbott lens. And that Abbott lens, I noted something similar when I reviewed it, that I found that images had a unique amount of pop to them that was a byproduct of very strong contrast combined with great color rendition and great sharpness. In this case, the center sharpness is fantastic. It's near perfect wide open. F2.8, it notches up a little bit, but you're already, hitting basically maximum center sharpness. And edge sharpness is good and at wide open and gets better. And kind of your maximum aperture or maximum landscape effective aperture is somewhere around between f5.6 and f8, and I noted that it peaked around f8. And so a byproduct of that is that you have a really fantastic lens, both wide open. It worked well when shooting events because it handles highlights really well. Again, having strong contrast helps in those situations because it doesn't have any kind of veiling or the chromatic aberrations that make handling really bright lights often fall apart. And so it worked really well under like spotlight type conditions. So it was great for that. It was effective for portraits, particularly if you value having a lot of detail rendered on the face or the hair, whatever you're trying to shoot. And so great in that aspect. And then when it stopped down, it was really great for landscapes. Tremendous amount of detail and great color and general pop to the images. Now, the trade-off for that, as I've seen with other really sharp, high-contrast lenses, is that sometimes in certain situations, the bokeh is a little busier than what I would like, in that it's hard to go from having amazing contrast and resolution on your plane of focus and then go to a completely buttery, soft, defocused area. Some of the best lenses for their bokeh quality are actually those that don't have a tremendous amount of wide open contrast, and so that's kind of true across the frame. In this case, while in most situations I think the bokeh, as you can see in these images, it looks very nice, beautiful. There are other situations where I found it a little bit busier and found that there were a few more hard edges than what I would like on certain of the defocused textures. And again, that's kind of the nature of the beast, the trade-offs that you get. The other vulnerability that this lens does have is that it is somewhat flare prone. Now, it comes with quite a deep, relative to the length of the lens, a relatively deep lens hood. But I did note at certain angles, particularly when the sun, not so much as a straight on, but the sun was coming through or a bright light coming through at an angle where it was just hitting the bottom of the front element, it would cause a veiling, quite heavy veiling that would come across the frame. And while there are artistic applications for that, it is at the end of the day, it is an optical defect. And so I did want to point that out. As I said, very low chromatic aberration. It handles, or it has also has very low distortion, next to no distortion. And so both of those qualities are very good. There is some vignette, and the vignette will begin to clear up mostly at f4. Most of it is gone except for in the very extreme corners, and then at f5.6 it is completely gone at that point. All in all, the optical performance is really strong. Now, at the same time, there are a lot of other alternative lenses like the Sony and the Abbott lens that I've mentioned that are also very strong optically and have a wider maximum aperture and a lower price tag. So I would say that if you are a purely stills photographer, unless you really want to have that commonality across the Abbott lineup, and so you have very uniform color accuracy and a similar look from all of your lenses, I would say that you might be served better with one of the autofocus options here, unless you really love beautiful manual focus action, which this lens has in spades. However, I come at it from a completely different perspective if you are going to be doing either hybrid stills and video work, or in particular if you primarily do video work, because this is definitely the best 85mm lens that I've seen on the Sony platform thus far for video work. It has just an amazing, as I've mentioned, it has amazing manual focus action. Very, very good. The ability to easily gear it, declick the aperture, to do a lot of video specific things. And on top of that, the video footage looks fantastic. And here is most of you know that I'm a minister, and so I wanted to shoot just a very, very short, right under 2-minute film, just kind of highlighting some of my favorite time of the day, my kind of morning routine, my morning devotions, my cup of tea. And just for the fun of it, I shot everything with this 85mm Sonnar lens. I shot it all on a Sony a7R Mark III, and none of this footage has been graded at all. This is straight out of camera. So take a look at this.
Somebody cares. Somebody's listening to your every prayer. He came from heaven and he died to prove that somebody loves you. You feel forsaken and you wear a frown. You think this whole world has let you down, but I know of one friend who will be true. Somebody loves you.
So as you can see, video footage looks pretty fantastic out of the lens. And so again, if you're a video shooter, this is kind of a no-brainer. Now, my final point on this is that like most Zeiss lenses, it comes at a price. This Zeiss is never known for producing cheap lenses, and of course that's true in every sense of the word. But this lens retails in the US market for $1,399, and that makes it the second most expensive of the the Loxia series. And so it is expensive, and so you need to weigh, what your priorities are in acquisition. But if this lens meets the qualifications of what you're looking for, there's very little for me to criticize in terms of the actual performance of the lens. It is a beautiful lens, beautifully made, beautifully crafted, beautifully functioning, and it produces really, really fantastic images. If you want to see more of those images, you can look in the description down below, and I've got a link there to my my image gallery, and I've been adding images to for the last little while. There's also a link there to my full text review if you prefer to read your reviews. And on top of that, you can find places to follow me on social media and check out some of my kind of published work there. You can also sign up for my newsletter or become a patron. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.